Welcome to the Wild Ag Podcast, where we'll serve as a connection point for landowners and conservation professionals who want to integrate conservation and agriculture. I'm Dr. Andrew Little, Professor of Landscape Ecology and Habitat Management and Extension Specialist at the University of Nebraska.
And I'm Nate Pfluger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Wild Ag Podcast. Today, we're going to be switching gears from wildlife. We're going to talk a little bit about soil health and soils as a whole. And so, Nathan, I'll kick it over to you and for some introductions.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, like Andy said, today we're going to be just having a soil health discussion, which I think is important for a number of reasons, right? I'm out there working with landowners and producers every day. And obviously, soil is an important part of an operation from the ground up. And today we actually have the Nebraska State Soil Scientist, Carlos Villarreal, with us. So Carlos, please introduce yourself and give us some background.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's we were talking earlier about opportunities to talk about your job and who you are. Sure. And I think being able to talk about soil health is really important, not only for producers to hear and but also for our staff to be able to make those connections with our field off with our customers about soil health. So
sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome.
So again, my name's Carlos Villarreal. I've been the state soil scientist here in Nebraska for almost 4 years.
Okay.
Originally born and raised in San Antonio, Texas.
Cool.
I typically introduce myself as being a first generation off the farm kid.
Oh, okay.
So we grew up about 4 hours away from our family farm and ranch. But on weekends, we would go down to, it was in South Texas, we'd go down to the valley and
Sure.
Do all of our hunting and fishing and messing around with livestock. And so I got to live the dream without having to be there full time. But, that's where I really discovered a passion for the outdoors, a passion for wildlife and agriculture. And so I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in agriculture, or at least a degree in ag.
Sure.
So I went to a small school, Tarleton State University, Stephenville, Texas.
Yeah.
Right outside of
I've heard of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, at one time I think it was the 80s, if you were an ag teacher in the state of Texas, there was a 80 or 90% chance that you went to Tarleton State.
Oh, really?
University.
No, that's pretty cool.
It's a good ag school.
That's cool.
I got a degree in agribusiness.
Okay.
And in earning that degree, I took an introductory soils class. And what I really loved about soils, and ultimately why I wanted to continue to pursue soils, is because to me, it was so interdisciplinary. Like, it involved physics, biology, chemistry, nowadays with technology, GIS, and it was just so cool. So I went to Texas Tech University, got a master's in soil science.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I started working with NRCS through our internship program. And I've been with NRCS for a little over 15 years now.
Oh, wow.
And again, here in Nebraska for the last 3.5. So it's really great to be here in Nebraska. It's a long way from home.
Yeah.
But I do think that being the state soil scientist is probably one of the most fun, exciting jobs I get to manage.
That's cool.
Our soil health program, our technology and conservation tools.
Sure.
What we call our technical soil services, helping people understand how to use soils information. So it's really great. Excited to be here. And we're thriving. It's just such a great place.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, I'm sure, coming from being in Texas and big ag state, and then coming here, obviously a lot of connections in that sense as well. And just being able to bring that knowledge here. That's really cool. Yeah.
Well, one thing I wish I got to spend some time in the forests in East Texas.
Oh, okay. Oh, sure. Yeah.
And, Nebraska's lacking in the piney woods department, but that's where understanding wildlife and soil health relationships and forestry, like the concepts of habitat management.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah. And I think that's to me, well, I was going to say real quick, I think that's the cool part is like, it's truly the foundation, as we were talking about, whether we're trying to, grow food plots, or you're trying to manage your forests, or, you're putting corn in or whatever, soil is that foundation. And without managing that soil properly, then you can't have those things. And that's ultimately, the importance of ensuring that sustainability in the long term. So, yeah, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say, it's neat hearing you tie wildlife back to just soil health in general. Obviously, with Andy and I's background, we enjoy the wildlife aspect, but to hear the state soil health or soil scientists talking about that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So obviously you work for the NRCS, or the Natural Resource Conservation Service. First of all, what's your guys' definition of soil health? And then what are your goals and objectives around soil health?
Okay. Well, the academic answer is it's the continued capacity of a soil to function. But to put that into context, to understand the capacity of a soil to function, you have to know what the function of a soil is. What do we expect our soil to do for us?
Yep.
And from an agronomic perspective, we're expecting the soil to hold the root, or hold the root mass, grow the seed, provide plant available nutrients and water, and all these functions of the soil. So the soil health would be just the capacity of that soil to provide those necessary functions for the plant. But again, in context, similar to human health, my definition of human health would be different than like an Olympic swimmer.
Oh, yeah.
So the definition of a soil health in different arenas of management systems and conservation have different expectations.
Sure.
So, talking about the goals and objectives, we at NRCS try to work with our producers to understand what their goals and objectives are, so that we can help them define what soil health is for them.
That's cool.
I guess we'll continue with the wildlife example.
Yeah.
Whatever the metrics are, whatever you're trying to gain from implementing these conservation practices towards soil health, that's what mainly our discussion is going to be, understanding what those metrics are, what you're trying to gain, and then how we can get you through that journey. And I will kind of echo what's popular in kind of pop culture right now, is that soil health it's a journey, not a destination.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Right now the soil health arena is just so populated with advocates, from Hollywood celebrities to the Gabe Browns, the farmers that have actually been implementing these practices and been very successful in doing it. That's really cool. So they're getting out and they're getting face to face with producers, at small events, at large events. It's really been a change in how we're advocating for soil health. I think before maybe it was almost like a taboo topic, or it was just something strange to hear about, but now it's all over social media, farm magazines, and I can't imagine a single county in Nebraska that hasn't been affected by some kind of soil health workshop or a conference.
True. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So it's a really good time to be involved with soil health, and but yeah, it depending on what your goals and objectives are, that's what we're trying to define for ourselves.
Definitely. Well, and I think that is a really good point to bring up, that as the NRCS, you're worried about that landowner's goals and objectives, because everybody's at a different place in that soil health journey. So they might not be looking to implement the same practices at the same time, or even their soils might be significantly different, right? Because soils have very high variability. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that's it. We can take it back to the soil forming factors. So here in Nebraska, we've got glacial till soils. We've got obviously the sand hills. We've got these beautiful, lush, thick, rich surface soils, and so that's. And then we have shallow soils in the Panhandle, but it's a pretty diverse set of soils. different characteristics of soil properties. But what's really valuable, or what I've learned about Nebraska, and what we should be proud of, is that we can grow grass in Nebraska. We can grow a lot of grass.
That's true.
Being able to see little blue stem and these native grasses that, in Texas or somewhere else, I mean, that's like that's a big deal.
Oh yeah.
But being able to see it here and see it abundant, it's it's, yes, we do have different soils, but we're really fortunate to have the soils we do.
Sure.
Definitely.
But yeah, when we talk about soils and the difference in soils, we look at the soil forming factors, how climate is influenced, how the biology has influenced the soils, and the parent material here. We have these glaciers that deposit all these soils, and it's we're really fortunate to have some good soils.
Yeah, thinking of just glaciers in Nebraska and helping form our soils is a pretty crazy thought to have. You mentioned parent material. What is parent material?
Yeah, so the parent material would be the source of the deposition, whether it's something like residuum, where we have mountains that have been slowly eroding away, or some uplifts from some kind of volcanic or tectonic activity. That certainly drives what kind of soils we have. If you think about like a floodplain, they usually have deep, rich, dark soils. Well, that's because all that material came from somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we talk about parent material, that's what we're talking about, is where's that material coming from? Whether it's aeolian sands, like the sand, blown in from somewhere, and then the vegetation would stabilize those dune systems or that network of soils. So it's really neat to, from a soil science, I don't want to get too nerdy about soil science, but
no, it's good.
From a soil scientist perspective, when we go out and we map soils, that's probably the first thing we look at, is what's the source of this material. And then that could help us guide what type of soil properties we would expect to see in those soils. So, we look at young, we call quote unquote young soils. Something in an alluvial floodplain. Those are the most recently deposited, whereas soils on top of a hill would be obviously a lot older in age. So we would totally expect different properties, either in soil depth to bedrock, or no characterization. There's no properties, and it's just a pile of dirt. So it's really neat to be able to take that concept of parent material and then apply it to when we're out mapping soils.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is parent material, I mean, at the end of the day, in the most basic form, just rocks that are broken down over time? And then obviously there's other components, but is that what soil is?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we have the geologic minerals. We have these minerals that will essentially weather down to some type of material. When you talk about what is soil made out of, that everything is matter. It's solid, liquid, gas. So soil is 50% solid, about 50% solid, 25% air, and 25% water. So that 50% fraction is where we have things like soil texture. That's where we have the different particle sizes. So if you remember that from school. But yeah, that parent material, or that mineral, the weathering process of that really dictates whether we're having, if it's weathered from sandstone, or if it's weathered from shale, volcanic ash. Those different minerals will have different properties and will definitely affect our soil texture, our bulk density, a lot of the geochemical properties, geophysical properties, and so it's really, that's soils are very dependent on that parent material.
I think one of the things that's really interesting, and this is just, I'll kind of use this for my gardening example. I always would have people, and even when I lived in Georgia, did my PhD down at the University of Georgia, they'd say, "Boy, how do you have such a great garden?" And I said, "Well, I go back to that early soils class I took in college, and just learning about soils and what they need, and kind of thinking and doing soil tests and stuff like that." Because they're always, and I said, not that I'm special by any means. It's just kind of I'm learning and using those, kind of those traditional rules and, kind of practices that you would find through your earlier classes and kind of say, hey, these are things. And a lot of it's very simple in the standpoint from a landowner, what they can do. Like, hey, I need to take and adjust, nitrogen application or, phosphorus or whatever. And you can do soil tests as just an example.
Oh, yeah.
To help with that process. And so, but one of the things I wanted to also hit on, and I really like this perspective that you mentioned about, is that journey. And I think that's important because, and it ties back to NRCS and what they're, that you guys do and cater to is working with those landowners and knowing that every landowner is there's no really necessarily a cookie cutter approach because everybody is going to likely be at different stages. And so I think one of the things, as you noted there with soil health, it's like everybody, you may have some people that are kind of in that really early phase versus people who have been maybe doing some of these practices. And I remember, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, visiting a farm out north of Grand Island, and they had been doing some soil health work for almost 30 years in their farm. And they were just, and doing things tied to cover crops and such. And as a component of that, and it was just really interesting to kind of learn, where different people are at in that journey. So I really like that aspect. So,
yeah, what's really, when you kind of tie soil health back to the soil properties and their journey, is we have soils that can rebound quickly. We've got soils that may not degrade as fast, that are more resilient to change. So that's why that soil sampling and understanding the soils using Web Soil Survey to know what soils you're on are really important. Just, like I said, we have those inherent resiliencies. We talk about soil health practices that can increase your resiliency towards climate change. These types of different, environmental resource concerns. But understanding how your soil, just the soil chemical and physical properties, will change with management.
Yep.
Aside from, I'm sure we'll talk about soil biology, but aside from the biology and these dynamic soil properties, just knowing how to manage your soil based on the pH and the clay content in turn affects the cation exchange capacity for nutrient management plans and the availability of, these exchange sites. I mean, it's so, you can get into
it. Hard science.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We're really, like I said, we're really fortunate to have really great soils. A lot of them are these lush soils are just so inherently fertile.
Yeah.
But being able to apply that to your garden or I mean, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
And at NRCS, we have conservation planners. We've got soil scientists that are there to help, what we call, again, that technical soil services, help you interpret that information and at least give you a baseline on where to start.
And I think that's a really important aspect to kind of note, is that there is a service there. There's people are there to help. It's not like we're kind of like getting you, throw you out there to the wolves per se. There's people you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this. What do I need to do? How do I improve these things on my property for the future? So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. You kind of mentioned resilient soils. So that soil being able to bounce back and provide those functions that we need it to. So what are the functions that we need soil to actually run through that process? And why is it important to not only producers out there, but even the general public that may not even own a garden or a plot of land that they're concerned with soil health?
Yeah. Well, again, that's a great question. From an agronomic system, we expect our soils, again, to hold the root, to provide these nutrients. But on a bigger scale, when we're expecting our soils to sequester carbon, that's a big one. We're farming carbon.
Yeah.
If you've ever listened to Keith Burns, and carbonomics, just puts it into it's so eloquently, expressed how carbon is that driver for soil health. And but what we really want to happen is we want plants to be able to grab the CO2 out of the atmosphere, feed it to the soil through these, root exudates, and then have that soil maintain and keep that carbon in their, habitat, their biological habitat, whatever. So that's the primary, what our emphasis on soil health is we're going to sequester carbon. And I think nationally that's been what everybody's trying to target.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So but the journey is, how do we get there? How are we doing that? Well, a soil can't just naturally have, well, I guess naturally it would, but nowadays in the systems now, we're in a production ag system.
Sure.
Our goal with soil health is to try to mimic nature. Well, how are you mimicking?
Sure.
How do you mimic nature in a production ag system?
Sure. Yeah.
So that doesn't make sense. So having these soil health principles that can at least guide you in the right direction to improve the soil or to regain that functionality. That's what we do at NRCS, and that's kind of nationally what our focus is, evolved around trying to capture that carbon.
Okay.
And all the benefits that come with having that carbon,
which are clean water, right? I mean,
right.
As water moves through the soil profile, that is pretty important for us.
Yeah, filtering water, any kind of toxins or heavy metals or some kind of contamination. Soils are the natural mitigation for that. And then, we try to keep our groundwater from being contaminated. That's one of the big concerns in Nebraska is groundwater contamination. I think we're 90% reliant on groundwater for drinking. So being able to have a nutrient management plan, and then 2, having soils that will actually convert those nutrients into plant available forms and sequester carbon and filter out anything. I think now they're talking about like the Vados zone, that zone between the topsoil and the final destination. What is the chemistry of that? What kind of functionality are we getting in that area? So I think from a drinking water perspective, from a soil erosion perspective, soil health should be important to everybody.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
We don't limit ourselves to just working with farmers. We also work with backyard farmers and agrarians. Or anybody that'll listen, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, and I can talk a little bit about our soil or our soil health principles.
Please.
Yeah, sure.
And
please.
Again, we're trying to mimic nature.
Yep.
The best we can in a production ag system.
Sure, absolutely.
But the first would be just keeping the ground covered, armoring the soil.
Sure.
Like
armoring the soil. That's good.
Yeah, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I know 30% residue reduces erosion by as much as 50%.
Wow.
Cuts erosion in half just by having that little amount of residue.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So when we go from a conventional tilled system that's been tillage maybe 2 or 3 times a year to that first year of no-till, we're gonna start to, I guess that's the biggest argument as well. It's got all this residue, can't plant into it, or
sure.
But that's the first hurdle is residue, understanding how to manage your residue, and keeping that residue on the fields.
And to hold that soil in place, right? So what are some of the problems? Say your soil is eroding off of your field. I mean, that's obviously hurting water quality, but you're losing soil nutrients and everything that you need in that field, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a result of not having the ground covered, that raindrop impact, disaggregating the soil surface PEDs.
Yep.
And then once those PEDs are in solution, then they're just carrying down down into the whatever the water source is. So it's here in Nebraska, it's not very common to have 0% slopes.
Sure.
So more often than not, it's going to run off. And
yeah.
But yeah, definitely want to keep in mind that soil erosion, reducing soil erosion through keeping the ground covered, and that also kind of follows the next one, which is minimize disturbance. So the amount of times that we're tilling, and the analogy that soil health people like to use is that you're destroying the house for all these microorganisms.
Oh yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
we're trying to promote these microbes to come to your, to come out, and by wrecking havoc with tillage equipment, it's, destroying that microbial community. But from a physical perspective, we rely a lot on soil structure because, that's an indicator that the microbes are building this habitat, that they're using these glues to create soil structure, places for water to move through. It's a sign of carbon storage is through this. So we use soil structure as a proxy for all these really great soil health values.
Okay.
Really cool.
But being able to maintain that soil structure and even improve the soil structure with additional practices like cover crops, that's a huge indicator and benefit to soil erosion, to water infiltration, to filtering contaminated soils. But that's what, keeping the ground covered, reducing disturbance, that's the big value in that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and I think one of the things that's interesting, and you noted there with the the lack of disturbance, we're trying to minimize that disturbance, and then also thinking about, I've just some examples that I've talked with landowners about. One, I remember when you mentioned erosion is a component of that, which I thought was an interesting statistic. I remember a landowner, this is maybe 4 years ago, gave a presentation on precision conservation, and this landowner came up at the end of the presentation and started talking to me, and he said, "Hey, I think it was in Northeast Nebraska, and I had farms and ranches up there." And he said, one of the things I'm really passionate about is finding ways that we can mitigate that erosion, because I've been seeing more and more soil loss over the years. And ultimately, as a landowner, I want to take and ensure the sustainability of my farm and ranch for my kids and grandkids, et cetera. And so what ways can I do that? Oh, hey, NRCS, for example, they have some programming they can help me with to identify maybe a filter strip or other things that you could put in. And so that's, to me, I think one of the cool aspects that, there are those opportunities to help the producers address those, like examples of erosion concern. Like, I don't want to continue to lose all my soil and watch it go down the stream. I want to ensure the integrity of those fields for the longevity, because you also noted earlier, it takes time for these things to happen. Soil doesn't just, get produced overnight. Right. We're talking, years, many, many years. Right. Thousands of years. Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was a really good point. I appreciate bringing that up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we certainly have these conservation practices that we have vetted through research, science-based outcomes from, depending on our land grant universities. And there's so much great research being accomplished right now. I'm not sure if it's just been a shift in research with our universities over the last 10, 15 years, but our universities have really stepped up and done an excellent job in providing that science-based foundation for our conservation practices.
Yeah, because then ultimately that's what we need, and we have to have, and I kind of think it was really a system, providing that research and help make decisions, because ultimately you got to make sure that, what practice are being promoted and actually has science going behind it. So, does this make sense or not? And we know that obviously, that's why science is constantly evolving. We're learning new things, and, new practices get generated because of some of that work that's being done. So I agree. That's a really good point.
Yeah. And I'll just pick on UNL because we're right here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But UNL does a great job with outreach and events. I think this year they had 2 soil health conferences. And then they've got the soil health schools out west the remainder of the year. Focused on like a geographical focus on whatever the resource concerns and management systems are out there. So the opportunity's there. It doesn't take much to, just have someone on the shoulder and say, "Hey, can you walk me through this?" And really what we've seen is that there's such a big emphasis now on developing these networks of producers. Someone that can serve as a mentor, someone that can, you can bounce ideas off of and just have that, fellowship with somebody that you have a common interest with. So
that's really good.
These workshops are really valuable. Having that science it makes us feel good being able to say, hey, by the way, if you have a problem with this, go talk
go talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I liked your other point, because we're going to actually do an episode on this kind of this idea of conservation cooperatives and landowners working together. And we just had, obviously, the other week you were able to attend as a Conservation Connection Point workshop. And the part of that, or really the point of that, I should say, is really to get people connected. And I think you're spot on there, having producers that are working with other producers, and then they can bounce ideas off each other. And then, like, for example, with UNL, we have the On Farm Research Network, and working with producers to test out new ideas. And it's really, that's what I think it comes down to. A lot of that is like, you're learning together, and then you have mentors potentially in your community that can help you, with some of that, especially as you, going back to that earlier point, kind of everybody's at various stages. So you have people maybe further along, saying that soil health initiatives that they've been implementing on their land. And then they can say, hey, here's things that I've learned that maybe didn't go as well as I was hoping for, but I learned from that.
Sure.
And here's things that went really well, and here's ways I can help you as a mentor to be able to provide that insight. And I think the more we can foster that, I think the better. And ultimately, then that helps really soil, water, and wildlife as a whole. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and I would even say that there's a shift culturally. You mentioned in the education system towards soil health. As I'm out there working with producers, even a lot of older producers are now being interested in soil health.
Sure.
But I've even seen more from the younger generations that's coming back to the farm and like, hey, I want to implement these soil health principles or things like that. And then having those mentors to say, hey, it's been done, you can do it, is extremely important.
Absolutely.
And kind of getting back to those soil health principles. How many did you say there were? 4. 4?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got to keep the ground covered, minimize disturbance.
The next one is living root.
Living root.
Keep a living root in the soil.
Sure.
So, we'll have a big emphasis on crop rotation, depending on, again, what your goals and objectives are. But we really want to be able to continually provide that food source for our microbiology.
Sure.
And we do that with cover crops, off-season cover crops, or even, if you want to do full season cover crops, you can do that as well.
Yeah.
But the goal of using cover crops is to be intentional with it, have a purpose for it.
Sure.
So, right now, a lot of fields have henbit on it. And
Oh, sure.
We get questions all the time. Well, hey, I do have a cover crop.
Yep. That I didn't have to pay for.
I didn't have to pay for. Right. Yeah, it's great. But really, the focus is just being very intentional with what we're trying to accomplish with our cover crops. So, our conservation planners, we spend a lot of resources getting them trained on cover crops. We've got agreements with UNL looking at cover crop varieties. Got trials all across the state, because we really want to know how we can how varieties do. Like, that's all great.
Yeah.
And we want to know what the best variety is, but also understanding when it's appropriate to plant a hairy vetch and some clover legume versus a grass, and empower our field conservation planners to be able to have those discussions with. Sure. Depending on what you're trying to, whether it's wildlife.
Oh yeah.
We want something that serves as a good habitat for wildlife, or we're trying to feed, we're trying to correct the C to N ratio in the soils. Or, if it's cattle grazing, we're trying to get more forage in the springs. Whatever the goal and objective are, we want to be intentional with those cover crops. So that, I would really interested in that topic of precision conservation, because if we're going to get value from a wildlife perspective, then we also want to be able to benefit the soil, and vice versa.
True.
If we're going to benefit the soil, then let's also benefit the wildlife.
Yeah.
And I think it even makes our argument stronger with producers, or our message stronger with producers, to be able to say there's additional values to planting these cover crops. Now we're going to get, whether it's pollinators, or we're going to get turkeys during this season, or whatever the benefit.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things we focused a lot on within our lab and with that topic of precision conservation is really thinking about ways that we can help producers create those stackable enterprises. And so whether you're doing, have this kind of base of the assumption of, say, with row crop or rangeland production, and going in and saying, okay, well, all right, we'll use a case example of like a row crop system. Okay, well, hey, I have marginal acres over here that I'm losing soil year after year. I'm just my yield potential there is so reduced. And honestly, you can look at the yield monitor data from the combine, but most producers can walk you to those pieces of their field. They don't necessarily need the technology to show that area because they've seen it for year after year. And so then saying, okay, well, I could do something a little different in that area and then benefit the soil as a whole, but also have all these other benefits from the water quality side of things to wildlife, et cetera. And who knows, maybe you decide you want to utilize that for some other type of recreational use, like hunting or things like that could then also make additional money on that land. So it's creating kind of these stackable enterprises per se is an opportunity, I think, for producers to think about. So
yeah, and I think that's a good point, Andy. It's kind of goes back to all soils are not created equal.
Sure,
some soils should be farmed, and maybe some should have perennial habitat for whatever reason, whether it's grazing or wildlife.
Sure,
but
and when we talk to producers, and maybe we need to have another discussion about this, because when we talk to a producer who's just now getting into soil health, they're brand new, they hear about it, and they want to start implementing some of these conservation practices. We tell them to not start. Well, we tell them to start small.
Sure,
we're not going to cover crop your entire operation, but let's start small, and let's not start in the area that you're having problems.
Yeah,
if you have an area that's maybe too wet or salinity is a problem or whatever, let's just focus on an area where we're going to get some value.
Yeah, set yourself up for success.
Right. Yeah,
I like that.
And then, but being able to do it on any land, would be valuable. And but I really do appreciate your messages on that targeted conversation for wildlife and cover crops for conservation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like you mentioned there, like, it's like starting small. I think it's the assumption you got to like do this massive change. And it's and I think really it's kind of this like do your best on maybe a small piece and then kind of forget the rest of that and say, okay, ultimately I'm going to make some incremental change and we're going to start working towards that. But I don't have to like totally change overnight, because it takes time. And I think then you start seeing those wins add up and you're like, okay, now this makes sense. Now maybe I want to expand that and go a little bit broader than what I was originally thinking. So kind of get those easy wins initially and start seeing that impact. And I think that's the one challenge I've seen is, for example, with cover crops is that, the assumption is we're going to have an automatic change overnight. And it does take a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we do live in this instantaneous society. We talked about this before at the beginning is like, we want all this stuff immediate and it does take some time. But once you start seeing that, and then again, going back to this mentor component, seeing somebody that's been doing it for a long time and having them showcase it, then I think that really is incredibly powerful because then it's saying, I've been doing this and look at some of the things that we've been able to do now because of these practices. So yeah, I like that. Yeah.
What's great about all these workshops and field days, we've started allowing, or I guess it's been more common now to have producers come up to the microphones and tell their stories and share their journey.
So like
every producer has like this is my journey. This is my story on how I became involved. And so you get, everything from people that just can't afford to run a disc anymore. To, I saw this documentary. It's all over the board.
That's cool.
But a lot of times it starts with someone just saying, I wanted to try something different. I got tired of this, or I wanted whatever their motivation was. But then, starting small, I started with this. And then next thing you know, I started raising beef and then I started grazing turkeys. And it just it was wild.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
It's like, how do you keep track of all this?
Right. So it's really fun to be a part of and just see that. But yeah, you're right. It's there may not be a system that or a one size fits all for everybody. But all of us in this together with extension, with all of our conservation partners in the state that just have this information on any kind of system, being so comprehensive in what our approach is. When we, my message to our employees, to our conservation planners, that's our first line of communication with a private landowner is my goal is not to give you all the information, just saturate you with so much, but or I can make connections with you. You know,
Correct.
and here's our extension educator in the
Yep.
in the county. Or
I like
here's, you know, that's been our strategy, and it's really worked out, and I think it's been great.
Yeah.
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 And
And I think
Yeah.
that's important just in the soil health realm, just talking about information. I mean, we say there's 4 soil health principles. So you're like, oh, that sounds pretty easy. But no, each one of those has hours and hours and thousands upon thousands of reviews and documents that support it. So you can't just give everybody information at once, or else they'd be scared to try anything, probably.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And you did talk about, you know, the producer, you know, our typical producer, whether they're younger or older. Some of the people that we've run across and that we've put on these platforms to share their stories are just the most creative,
That's cool.
innovative people, and they're having fun.
Yeah.
You know,
That's really cool.
I remember, you know, in Texas, one of these aha moments that I had. We went to work with a local university. They had you know, they were trying to develop a site for grazing and have all these demonstrations for students, hands-on, immersive learning type of thing. And across the other side of the street was just a monoculture Bahia grass. and he said, you know, I want our place to look like that. And I said, no, man, that's degraded. It's overgrazed. It's
Sure.
So, you know, soil health looks different for many people.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really on us to be able to say,
Sure.
you know, hey, we've got all this technical assistance. We have it all available for you.
Yeah.
Like, let's just come on in and we'll make sure you have all the information you need. But just being open-minded to creativity, and you know, I guess in the past I've always said that the 2 most creative people are artists and forklift drivers. A forklift driver can do this. Like, it's the craziest thing.
That's funny.
But you know, being
no, it's true. Yeah, no, it's true.
You know, it's like, hey, I've got to change I got to change the spare tire. Okay, let me get my forklift. but yeah, it's so yeah, having that innovation, and then the last soil health principle was just diversity.
Okay.
Having again, we're being intentional with our cover crops, but having diversity in how we're managing our soil biology. What kind of sugars are we feeding it? What is the architecture of the roots that we're planting?
Oh, sure.
So would diversity be not only crop diversity, but also bringing animals back to the operation, or what's kind of all under diversity?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In Texas, we recognized 5 soil health principles. In Nebraska, a lot of people will group diversity with livestock integration.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
but yeah, having the urine, the manure, the hair from different animals, and the chickens, the activity that scratching from chickens, and the action from grazing, like that bite action. I don't know how they've described that from cattle. But yeah, just having all these different triggers and having just like this chaos below the surface. Really, one, it promotes more diversity in the microbiology.
Sure.
But also it keeps them active. And when it comes to soil health sampling, that activity component is a metric that we use for how healthy a soil is.
Sure.
So being able to create some kind of mini disturbance and then having that reaction, having something that we can measure, which is that CO2 burst.
And that CO2 burst is coming from microorganisms within the soil?
Yep.
Okay.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So it's, it's almost like, if you're at a basketball game, the minute you tip the ball off, the final score at the end. So we're measuring that final score. Once we create some kind of disturbance, then what's the outcome after they do these bursts in different hour increments.
Okay. And is that essentially them breathing?
Right.
Okay.
It's just how much output are they giving?
Okay.
So depending on how much output that output is a measure of how much activity you have, microbial activity you have in the soil.
I've heard some pretty crazy numbers just around soil biology within a healthy soil. I mean, I've heard billions in a tablespoon. I mean, is that accurate?
Right.
How much soil biology is out there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's accurate. I've heard the same. I don't know if it's I don't know. I've heard the same thing. It's that in a teaspoon of soil, there's more bacteria than there's more biology. I don't know if it's bacteria, but there's more biology in a teaspoon of soil than there are human beings on the earth.
Really?
Crazy.
Oh, wow. That is crazy.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
And then so kind of a little more on the biology, because it is so interesting to me because it's just below the ground and you're like, there's nothing down there. You said bacteria, there's fungus. I mean, what are the other biologicals within the soil?
So we have this entire soil food web. So it starts with the bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, the different arthropods, and it's this big network of biology, and the emphasis is that it has to be balanced. The way that I've had it described to me, and it's tough to describe without a picture, but you've seen those pictures of like the United States at night where you can see the big cities, the lights.
Yeah.
But essentially that's where the fungi are. These networks of big cities. You can see where the fungi are, and the bacteria just going back and forth through the highways, eating here, eating that. But the big emphasis right now, because we don't have that sophisticated of a sampling method, and is just to understand that balance. We want a balanced bacteria to fungal community.
Sure.
There's these different breakdowns of like functional groups within that.
Yep.
What do you know? Oh, sorry to cut you off
go ahead.
there. I was going to say, kind of on more of those sampling methods, what is a balanced bacteria to fungal community? Do we have a good idea of that?
Yeah, I don't. I know our labs here in Nebraska, we've got some labs that are developing those, or they can give you better, estimates on what it should look like. What's really common now is to send your samples in and to get either like a soil health score or something like that. They'll normally give you where the benchmark is for that, for those types of parameters. So if it is a fungal community, if you're dominated by bacteria, whatever it is, it'll tell you what your number is, and it'll say, hey, typically we're in this range. Sure. And talking with Dr. Ray Ward at Ward Labs, he typically has a field day, and he's been so familiar with lab data. Sure. He can basically look at results and tell you what the land use is, tell you where it came from, what part of Nebraska.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So it's, we definitely have that context in soil samples, but our labs are really committed to helping our producers evaluate those, those results. And that could be one of the biggest hurdles right now is there's so much innovation in the lab sampling space for soil health metrics that we really, we want to be comprehensive in our sampling, but right now we're mainly looking at trends.
Okay.
Are you trending up or are you trending down?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And that's how we, we're moving towards being able to provide that recommendation piece based on a certain metrics. I mean, wouldn't it be great to be able to look at the DNA of all the biology and say, well, you have this one fungus guy here, and this is the one that helps you improve yield, or this is the one that's going to change the balance, whatever it is. Sure. But we're just not there yet.
Yeah.
Understandable.
We're moving in that direction. It's interesting because I think when I was thinking of analogies you're talking about there, the kind of the balance, like think about like the human microbiome. We think a lot about, especially in that health arena of kind of maybe people taking probiotics, for example, because they may have imbalances. And it's this idea of, well, you want to try to have good and bad and, bacteria in your gut microbiome. So it's kind of thinking about similar idea as analogy to kind of we're trying to get that balance per se, and then seeing what that potential impact is. So yeah, I like that. It's interesting to also think about like how those different components could potentially affect like yield potential or other components within that, Yeah. Soil profile. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
For
One
sure.
time we paid for a DNA sample with our soils, and the lab received the samples, and they said, "Oh, by the way, we could tell that someone rubbed their eye before they collected the soil." Yeah, it's pretty
That's
far
pretty
out.
incredible.
But even then,
That is,
I think
that's incredible.
when we had sent that in, they came back and said that they could only identify 10% of the
Interesting.
whatever the makeup was of that DNA, just because the library wasn't ready at the time. But that was, several years ago. So I'm not sure how much progress they've made since. But
well, imagine when it'll be 25 years, 10, 15, 25 years from now. See what that'll look like. That'd be pretty incredible.
If they can tell you, hey, we detected the presence of this fungus, and this is the one that will give you, this much return on. It's like, okay, well, now how do I target that one?
Sure. Yeah.
That would be wild.
Yeah, that is wild.
So obviously that's pretty complex stuff that you have to send off. Your producer can't do that at home. Are there any simple methods of just kind of going out to your field and is my soil healthy? Are there any of those that a producer could run themselves?
Sure. So for NRCS, we have an infield soil health assessment that our conservation planners use when they go to the field with our customers. We have a set of, it's maybe a dozen different assessments. We call them rapid assessments. So, getting a soil sample, looking at the soil structure, how does it fall apart when you stick it in water? I mean, we have these rapid assessments. How much, when you have last year's crops, say we have some corn stalks that are on the surface, how much degradation do we have in these? How much are they being decomposed? We use these as proxies to determine the fungal community or the microbacteria or the microbiology. We try to use simple guides of color, looking at the soil color. How much organic matter loss have we had from what it was originally mapped?
Yeah.
So these rapid assessments are what we use when we go to the field. So for someone who's not going to send in a sample, just wants to go take a look, we just advocate to carry a shovel, just dig a hole, see what you see. I mean, earthworms are a good indicator of soil health or a healthy soil. Those types of things, and our field offices work with. They'll go out and they'll create maps and they'll do all these assessments, and then be able to make some kind of estimate without having to use a soil sampling or without having to send in a soil sample.
Which is, I think definitely important that a producer can go out and at least get a snapshot in time without having to send something off is definitely important. You mentioned organic matter and soil color. Can you touch a little bit on organic matter? What is it? Why is it important? What's it have to do with soil color?
Well, yeah. So I talked earlier about matter. The soils are made up of matter.
Yep.
50% solid, and then the rest liquid and gas. But there is that, 2, 3, 4% organic matter. And what we're doing is we're capturing CO2 from the atmosphere. We're feeding it to our soils. The soils are putting it in a compartment somewhere and storing it. There's two forms of carbon. There's the carbon that's not going to be touched, that are so strongly bonded that it would take a lot to get it out of there. But then we have that carbon that's just easily accessible. So when we go out and do a tillage pass, or if we disturb the soil somewhere and all of a sudden we have just green, tall weeds, well, that's the carbon that can get released quickly. So
that's interesting.
So those two forms of carbon, but basically, how much of that we're storing, how much we can, how much of that labile carbon, that long-term storage are we keeping, and then how much is just free to go.
Okay, so that carbon is part of that organic matter, right? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And then right now we have like soil carbon amendments right now, biochar, compost, being able to amend the soil in that way. And right now I'm not familiar with the science on how valuable those are. I know they're valuable, but as far as quantitative,
still a lot to learn.
There's still a lot to learn. Yeah.
And how we plan that with our producers, and how we promote it. We're still working on all that, but
Sure.
but yeah, that the big emphasis now is building that capacity in our soils to hold carbon. And these soil health principles, keeping the ground covered, minimizing disturbance, we're really creating an environment that allows for that.
Yeah.
In a production ag setting.
Sure.
So, and then I've been talking a lot about cropland, but when it comes to rangelands, when it comes to grazing systems, it's the same principles. Having a grazing management plan so you're not overgrazing.
Sure.
There's some really, and to me, grazing systems are the most fun because you get to be more creative.
Sure.
With multi-paddock grazing and setting up your paddocks and your water and how you're going to manage all that. And to me, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I really enjoy doing that.
Well, it'd be interesting. This is a little tangent. Being a scientist, I have a master's student right now. Caitlin Dozler is working with. We're co-advising her. Mitch Stevenson and I are co-advising her, and we're looking at virtual fencing for cattle right now. And so one of the things that's cool about that is that you can move them around within the different pastures and promote, basically that component of, hey, I don't want to overgraze some of these areas, or hey, the cattle haven't spent much time over here. And so I guess kind of as a little plug for her work, one of the things that'll be interesting to kind of explore, I think, in the future is thinking about the soil and soil health, but utilizing technologies like that can help as opposed to kind of, maybe the traditional route. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thinking the possibilities with precision grazing.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
If you can, those GPS units, if they have the accuracy where you can do some high density grazing on areas that are, maybe you have issues. Oh my gosh, like I said, the opportunity to be creative.
No, absolutely.
It's so much fun.
Yeah. No, sure. Yeah. I think, and that's one of the unique things that you kind of play around with different ways. And again, it also caters to a couple of things. One, that back to that point that no property is going to be the same. There's no cookie cutter approaches. Mm-hmm. They're all going to be different. And then two, you mentioned about with the science and how that's, evolving over time with things like the biochar and things like that. You're kind of learning more what's complex. And we have an episode we actually taped recently about science as a whole, like, how-to science type of thing. Like, how does all this stuff work? Because we live in, again, this instantaneous society. We want an easy answer, and it's really more complex. And that's why science is constantly evolving. We're learning new things. And that, as we get more information, then that can help, again, through that extension network, kind of, get out to landowners and, help them improve their practices. So, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on that, hopefully there's some landowners out there that have listened to this and it's kind of got them excited about soil health and they're thinking about coming to the NRCS. Do they go to their local office? And then how do they ask about the programs, or what programs should they ask for? And we don't need to dive into specific practices because that comes with different cost share in different counties. But what would be the next step for a landowner looking to get started?
So our flagship product is that conservation plan.
Sure.
So that's our interaction with a soil conservationist or the conservation planner in the field office, working one-on-one with our producers and our customers, identifying resource concerns, developing conservation practice alternatives, essentially giving you a comprehensive plan on fixing, or addressing the resource concern.
Sure.
What happens would be we would look at the alternatives, sit down with the planner and the customer, and they would make decisions on what conservation practices they want to start using. Now we do that's that financial piece, and then we have that's the technical assistance piece, and then we have that financial assistance incentive program as well.
Sure.
And that's where we would contract with the producer to offset some of the costs,
sure,
the startup fees, startup costs, or really trying to assume some of the risk, and then hoping that would either address the resource concern fully or lead towards a long-term adoption of some kind of practice.
Yeah.
From a soil health perspective, from my shop, my statewide goal is just to increase the long-term adoption of cover crops or the long-term adoption of no-till. And I think every every state is probably like that. So
has it been trending upwards really in that, no-till and cover crops a whole? That's my assumption.
right.
So yeah, over time.
Yep.
That's
And
cool.
NRCS, I don't have this year's numbers, but soon, hopefully very soon, NRCS will have planned their millionth acre of cover crops.
Really?
Yeah, so that's
Oh, wow.
a million acres of cover crops that we've worked with producers to put
Wow.
on the ground.
That's
Wow.
exciting.
That's really exciting.
Off the top of your head, I'm a little bit competitive. Do you know where we rank among other states as far as are we top 5, top 10 in cover crops and no-till acres?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to look at the most recent NAS surveys and tell you. But I do know that the amount of no-till acres is very competitive with other states in the Midwest. I mean, we're out there.
That's really cool.
Doing a great job. And then I don't know what the cover crop numbers are, but again, it's the more that we continue to have these conversations, public conversations, and be transparent with the benefits and bring all of our partners along together.
Sure.
I think there's no reason why we couldn't be at the top here in the next few years. I mean, from what I've seen, the passion that UNL extension educators have, the passion that our researchers have, our conservation partners, it's amazing to see.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
One little kind of anecdote to all that. So one of the things that was interesting, I was talking to a landowner hunting his property, and I always wondered why these deer would walk up through this one area regularly. And he said, well, it's been interesting. He said, over the years of learning, he said that farmer was one of the few that kind of started out a number of years ago with no-till and then started putting cover crops. And those deer would come out to that field, and they almost got like habituated to come there because nobody else around the area was doing any type of no-till or cover crops in our land. Now, whether or not that's all, totally factual in that sense, it may just be kind of they happen to like that area for a variety of reasons. But it was a nice illustration to show that was one of the few fields, even in the wintertime, that had, green growth on it.
Yeah.
And things were, being produced there, and the animals were utilizing those fields. So, yeah.
Definitely neat.
What's been a cool concept that I've learned since being in Nebraska is this concept of catching snow. No idea what that means.
Yeah.
Being from Texas.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, did you have any?
Yeah. I was gonna say, probably not down in San Antonio.
No, nothing like this. But yeah, I mean, everything, it just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
These catching snow and the amount that we can produce in Nebraska with cover crops and wildlife. There's so many gains that we can have.
Yeah.
And then having our conservation partners being able to explain what those gains are. I think it all makes sense. It's just a really good network that we have here.
Yeah. And that was kind of a little analogy, right? It's kind of made sense to me. I was like, I see why they would come there. Like there's not much else out there, especially in that, fall, winter time period. So anyway. Yeah.
No, and I know we're coming up on time here, Carlos, and I have one final question personally. I mean, I have a lot, but I have one more that I want to ask.
More episodes, Carlos.
Without a doubt. I had a landowner ask me, what's the difference between soil and dirt? Can you get a good answer on that, please?
Yeah, I can do my best. We talk about soil being soil is an association. So we have soil that has soil properties. It has a home. It has, these soil forming factors. We can tie information to the soil. Dirt would be that dissociation. Dirt is something that, we just knock off of a tractor and it's just laying on the ground and it doesn't have a home really. So, there probably is a more romantic definition of soil versus dirt, but we from our team, we look at it and just say it's soil because it has information. It has a home.
That's cool.
Okay.
But yeah, it's I wish I had a better. I need to just take time to figure
I like
that
that.
out.
No, it's like it has a home. It makes sense.
It makes me feel better that you said that because my response to him was what just fell off my boot here in your shop. So I was at least in the right ballpark.
Yeah.
But no, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate you having you here, and we covered a lot of good information. Is there anything else you want to cover or say before we wrap it up?
Well, I think I did take a few notes, and I'm glad we got to talk about the principles of soil health. And I think I said enough how strong our relationships are with our conservation partners and how much value we can provide to our customers and the people that want more information. And from a customer, participant, customer, landowner that does want more information, we have field offices in nearly every county in the state that would love to have you come in and just talk shop with you.
And that's just looking up your local NRCS office, Natural
Right.
Resource Conservation Service.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And even our partners, PF and Extension. I mean, we're all in this together. So
Sure.
Any way you need to get connected, please do. And of course, this is voluntary conservation, so you can come and go as you please.
Sure.
But yeah, we just want that we want you to at least start that journey. We talked a little bit about having your story.
Yeah.
And everyone's got one. And I just invite people to come and at least have a conversation. We're always down to have a conversation.
I think that was well said. And even if you're not in the right spot, we have our partners work together really well that will get you pointed in the right direction. So.
Yeah. And, if people want to, take and drop a note or share any of those stories, we have an email, wildagpodcast@gmail.com. I think we would love to hear some of those stories as well, in addition to Carlos. And because I think you're right. I think to kind of wrap this all up is that having those stories, I think really is the power, from the landowners kind of sharing how their journey, where they're at in that journey, and how that information can then be translated out to peers in their community to expand those efforts. So I like that.
Yeah. Good point.
That's
With that, thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Carlos.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks again. All right.
Appreciate it.
Wild Ag is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review so others can find us and tune in.
And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions or topic suggestions to us at wildagpodcast@gmail.com. That's WILDAG podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.